Released in 1991 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, courtesy of Jaleco, Totally Rad, aka Magic John in Japan, not that Magic John, is a side-scrolling action platform game where you assume the role of Jake, a totally radical 90s teen using gnarly 90s slang and magic to face off against the forces of evil that are tubularly evil. Radical, dude. Right, so at first glance, Totally Rad looks to be a side-scroller game of sorts where you run, jump, and shoot magic bolts left or right against various creatures and robots. You know, much like that one game there. Although Jake isn't anywhere near as nimble as the old Rockman. He's a bit slow, his somersault jumps are kind of floaty, and he can't climb slopes, or stand on them for that matter, he just slides down. Jake does have a charge shot of sorts, and it's done by holding down the B button, but he can only use it on the ground, and if you jump while charging, you'll automatically release your charge shot, so bear that in mind. Now, if this was all Totally Rad had to offer, then this game would be a total bummer, dude. Fortunately, Jake has about a dozen-ish magic spells at his disposal. Simply pause the game to bring up the magic menu, pick a spell with the A button, and then press up and B to execute said spell, provided you have enough magic energy to execute said spell. At your disposal are a variety of healing spells, screen nuking spells, time-stopping spells, and finally transformation spells that let you transform into one of three alternate forms. A Birdman form that lets you fly around with the repeated taps of the A button, a Lion form with a powerful claw attack and somersault jump that makes you invincible, sort of like a screw attack except you don't actually hurt anyone with this thing. And finally a frog form who is naturally a good swimmer, and since there's only one level with copious amounts of water to swim through, this form will naturally see the least use. While these forms have their benefits, they also prevent you from casting other spells, so sooner or later you'll need to change back to your default human form if you're wanting to use some gnarly magic, man. So you're given quite a few tools from the get-go to tackle the game's 5 acts, each divided into several rounds. At the end of each round, you'll encounter a mini-boss that you'll have to overcome before you can proceed onwards, and at the end of each act, you'll encounter a really big boss that you'll have to take down before you can move on to the next act, kind of like that other game that we looked at a short while ago. I swear I didn't do this on purpose. I totally forgot this game had big bosses that you face at the end of each round, and it just happens. Though to be fair, the game that we looked at previously, Trophy, has better play control, and I've said that much there. Control in Totally Rad is responsive, it works, but just the way Jake moves feels somewhat stiff and rigid. He moves slowly, his jumps have a bit of float to it, and his lack of grip on slopey surfaces is baffling. You have 3 lives and 3 continues to make it through all this game. Lose a life and you restart at the beginning of the current round. There are no checkpoints whatsoever. You die at the boss, you have to make your way back. Lose all your lives and you can continue at the beginning of the current act. A bit stiff, but that's how things worked back in the day. Coincidentally, Totally Rad is a game that can be a bit stiff in its difficulty. The enemies here are fairly aggressive, take a bit of punishment before being defeated, and some of them hit hard, able to kill you in a couple hits. And while you have a bunch of spells and transformations at your disposal to help you out, these require magic energy to use, and if you don't have enough magic to use the spell, the game will prevent you from picking said spell. To make matters even more bogus, Totally Rad does not have a single power-up to be found at any point. They're not dropped by enemies, nor are they out in the wild waiting to be collected. And both your life and magic meters only refill whenever you enter a new round, so you'll need to manage your magical abilities wisely if you're going to survive and conquer this bodacious battle. Totally Rad has cutscenes. They look fine. The creepy magician dude is indeed creepy looking, and also I don't know why the magician called Zeb has a P on his hat. I guess his name starts with a P in the Magic John version and they couldn't be bothered to change it in the Totally Rad version, even though they changed the main characters, so I don't know. Anyway, the graphics in Totally Rad are actually pretty good. There's a couple stages that show off some neat parallax scrolling effects in the background, which is a nice little touch, but the levels you traverse are actually quite detailed and surprisingly grim and dark for a game that has its share of 90s slang and such. The individual sprites are okayish, including your somewhat awkward running main character, as well as this green dude who bears a striking resemblance to a certain Spartan. So we know where that game got its inspiration. And the giant bosses look pretty good, all things considered, even though you're fighting them in the Black Void, which, again, you know, technical limitations of dealing with giant bosses on the NES. I mean, look, you can make fun of the cover all you want, but that hair does appear in the game, so credit where it's due, for whatever that's worth. Speaking of which, I don't have the manual on hand, but apparently that's quite a piece of literature if you're lucky enough to come across that piece of business. Now, sound in Totally Rad fares a bit worse off, particularly in the sound effects, which tend to be stock at best and somewhat grating at worst. As far as the soundtrack goes, it's nothing to write home about, but it's fine for the most part. Nothing that really sticks, but nothing too offensive either. It's just there. Overall, Totally Rad. Actually, you know what? I didn't mind this one. There's some neat ideas going for this game. Big bosses, a wide arsenal of magical abilities including a variety of screen nukes and transformations. The scenery's quite nice. It's not the most graceful experience in terms of control and challenge, but it's a fairly respectable effort with a fair bit of charm to it. Or maybe it's cringe depending on how you feel about all that 90s lingo. Totally Rad has some warts that keeps it from being totally rad, no pun intended, but is otherwise perfectly average platforming fare. Not great, but not too bad.